Tampa General Hospital and USF Health, Morsani College of Medicine are bringing the power of academic medicine to Palm Beach County and the Treasure Coast. For nearly 2 decades, Tampa General has been ranked as one of the nation's best hospitals. And for over 50 years, Tampa General has been Florida's leading academic health system. Learn more about their growing network of physicians at tgh.org/the Palm Beaches. So welcome to the Palm Beach North podcast. I'm Noel Martinez, President and CEO of the Palm Beach North Chamber of Commerce. And today I'm excited to highlight the world of sustainable agriculture and business leadership. Joining me today is Gaston Cantens, Vice President of Corporate Relations at Florida Crystals, a name that I'm sure you've heard of if you spent any time here in South Florida. Gaston's journey is pretty inspiring, right? Going from state politics to becoming a key leader of one of Florida's most iconic agriculture companies. Florida Crystals has been around since 1960, pioneering sustainable and organic sugarcane farming right here in the United States. They're also leading the charge in regenerative agriculture, using everything from barn owls to biomass energy in their operations. Gaston, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Noel. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you and with all of your viewers and listeners.
Thank you. So let's start from the beginning. You've have a very fascinating path, right? From public service to leading Florida Crystals. Tell me a little bit about that journey and what you've learned along the way.
It was a time when my wife used to ask me, what do you really want to be when you grow up? Because ever since I graduated from college, I've just seemed to go from one thing to another, and none of them were related. So I graduated from college, and I was a teacher for about 6 years and coached basketball during that time. And then I went back to school, became a lawyer, and was a prosecutor with the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office for almost 4 years. Then I got elected to the legislature and served in Tallahassee as a member of the Florida House for 6 years. And then I came to work at Florida Crystals, and that's going to be, it'll be 21 years in May.
21 years, time flies, huh?
I think I finally grew up, my wife says.
So we're going to talk a little bit about family here in a little bit, but there are a lot, politics and business really seem worlds apart, but in reality, they intersect in a lot of different ways. So tell me a little bit about how politics has shaped the way you approach how you work at Florida Crystals.
So, business generally is obviously the government sets regulations, they set the rules, they create the policies, the statutes, legislation that businesses have to abide by. So if you have good business-minded people in office, you're going to get business-friendly legislation and policies. If you have individuals elected that are not business friendly, then you're going to get policies that are somewhat anti-business and make it a little bit more difficult for businesses to grow and to compete, not just locally, but nationally and at the global stage, which is where we're at today. Is everyone with the advent of the internet and all the Amazon and all the things out there. Everyone competes globally nowadays. Everyone's online. Everyone's trying to sell something online. So it is very important to have policies and individuals in office that are going to promote businesses.
Why Florida Crystals? How did you end up with Florida Crystals? What's the story behind that?
So I was obviously aware of the company and the Fanjul family from many years ago. Being in the legislature, I was able to observe how they operated, how they, the things that they did, how they transformed their business and the industry, really. Their interaction with on the Everglades issues, how they developed new policies or new management practices to make sure that they were farming in a very environmentally friendly way. And it just kind of happened from one day to the next. We had actually the individual I had the job before me was an old friend of mine, and he was moving on to another job, and he came to see me one day, took me to dinner. We had dinner and tried to talk me into taking this job and give up my last 2 years in the legislature. And at which point I said, when you're trying to hire me is because you must have some skeletons you need me to cover up for you or something. But anyways, it worked out. We had been friends for a long time, and things just happened very quickly.
Great. So you've worn a ton of different hats, right? We talked a little bit about it. You've been a high school teacher, you were a prosecutor, state rep. Now you are the vice president of a huge global company. What role has been the most challenging for you, and which one has been the most rewarding?
Yeah, it's interesting because each one of those roles and jobs, services that you perform have different challenges and different rewards. As a teacher, as a coach, you're working with teenagers, you're working with young kids that are just trying to find themselves, and you're trying to get them to find the right path for them. And everyone has a different path. As a prosecutor, and that in and of itself is very rewarding because you see these kids that, with regards to basketball, one day they can't make a layup, and a couple of weeks later, now they're able to make layups and shoot a jump shot, and you see the progression and the self-confidence that they develop through sports. And same thing in the classroom. You see kids develop, and you help them mature. As a prosecutor, you're working, oftentimes, most of the time, you're working with a victim. And the victim is seeking justice, and the ability to bring someone to justice, and not that you're ever going to, if it's a homicide case, you're never going to bring a life back, you're never going to bring property back if it's stolen, but that there is some level of punishment and the victim sees that the justice system works. I think is very important and rewarding as a prosecutor. I'll tell you, being a prosecutor is one of the funnest jobs I've ever had, just because it's very active. You're in the courtroom all day. You're in trial on a regular basis. You're in front of a jury. You're able to work with victims, as I said, and help them achieve some sense of justice in the process.
What about being a state rep? What was that like? What was that experience like?
It was being a state legislator. I didn't know what to expect. I had never been in politics when I ran. My thought was I was going to be a judge one day, and being a prosecutor, that was kind of a natural progression that you might think. And that was my goal, was to become a judge. And one night I'm sitting at home and I'm watching the news, and they're playing a video of two legislators in a fight on the House floor, literally a fight.
Fist fight.
And it's two members from Miami. And they're pushing and shoving each other. I'm not sure any punches were actually thrown, and I turned to my wife and I said, this is so embarrassing. This is our legislator. He's on a fight on the House floor, and they're fighting over school choice. And he's a Republican fighting with another Republican, and they're on opposite sides of the school choice issue. And she just kind of half-heartedly and jokingly said, "Oh, you should run against them." And that's how it happened. I thought about it. I said, you know what? If this is the best that our district can send to Tallahassee, it's an embarrassment, and we should do better. I didn't have any political connections. I wasn't able to raise any money. It was quite an ordeal to take on an incumbent that had all the benefits of the office, obviously fundraising and the contacts. And he actually had a radio show at the time on Spanish language radio in Miami. So it was quite a task. When you start knocking on doors, you realize, we'd been going to the same church for years. You see the people you saw at church. The next door, you see the parents of a kid that I had at some point in school, or my wife, who was also a teacher for 35 years, that she had in the school. And before you know it, you realize, wow, we might be able to do this without having to raise the hundreds of thousands of dollars that people typically raise. And now it's almost millions for a house race. The fundraising has gotten pretty heavy.
It's crazy.
So we ended up, it was literally a grassroots campaign, door to door, knocked on thousands of doors, and we ended up winning by 222 votes.
Wow.
So that was an interesting beginning to the process. And I got to Tallahassee, and I've never been there one time in my life to file my papers. I didn't know what to expect. It was the beginning of term limits. So I actually served with members that were about to be term limited during my first term. So that was their last 2 years. So I overlapped with members that had been there for 20, 30 years. And it was an interesting process because while you had partisan issues and you had Republicans and Democrats, you had a lot of dialogue amongst the members, and especially on issues. I remember one time there was an insurance issue that came up, and I went to the insurance chairman, who was a Republican at the time. But the Republicans, remember, had just taken off. I was elected in 98. Republicans had just taken the majority in 96. So I go sit with him to ask him some questions about an insurance bill. And he looks at me and shakes his head and says, yeah, I really don't know. You need to go talk to John Cosgrove. I looked at him and said, well, John Cosgrove's Democrat. He said, yeah, but he knows all these things. So I went and sat with the Democrat, John Cosgrove, and we walked through the whole thing. It was a very collaborative process. So that was interesting, and there was a lot of bipartisanship at the time. So it really, truly was a great process.
How is politics different now than it was back then when you served?
It is without doubt as partisan as we have ever seen, and there's it's hard to get both sides having a conversation and discussion and working together. I mean, there's some issues that they obviously come together on. But a lot of the issues, a lot of the policy, and a lot of discussion currently is being driven by social issues, and those are issues that you're never going to have compromise on. I mean, there's certain issues that you're never going to get Republicans and Democrats to agree on, whether it's the death penalty or abortion or things like that. Those are very difficult issues to try to reach compromise on, and those are some of the types of issues that are driving a lot of the discussion.
Let's jump into the private sector a little bit. So what does your day look like? What does the vice president at Florida Crystal's day look like?
So it's a lot of phone calls, that's for sure.
I bet.
I did corporate relations at Florida Crystals, but I also oversee a lot of the governmental work. So a lot of, still very much involved in political aspects of the state legislature and even some of the federal congressional races. So working with legislators, elected officials, developing those relationships, whether it's traveling, usually every 2 years during an election cycle, I take usually a couple of weeks and travel around the state and go visit some of the legislators or candidates, try to meet them in their hometown, understand what their issues are, and see how we can work together on the issues that are important to agriculture in the state of Florida.
Do you spend a lot of time in Tallahassee and DC?
Mostly Tallahassee. I mean, definitely during session, I spend a lot of time up there, at least 3-4 days a week. And then during committee weeks, as we're getting ready to start committee weeks. Actually, this week, we're starting committee weeks. So yeah, the next few weeks, a month of February will all be committee weeks. I'll be up there at least 2 or 3 days during committee weeks, and then most of the session.
All right, let's go back a little bit further back. So we talked about you being a basketball coach, which I think is one of the coolest things about you. You and I talk sports and basketball all the time. What inspired you to take that on, and why basketball?
So I think basketball had a big impact in my life. When I wasn't a very good player. I got cut when I was in 9th grade on the JV. Eventually someone quit and they let me back on. I sat on the bench for a whole year. And over the next 3 years, I made it a point to become a better basketball player. And by my senior year in high school, I was the starter on the basketball team. And as a result of that, the effort that I put in, the work that I put in to get there, and the result that I got, it gave me the confidence to be able to be successful. And I learned that if you work hard at something, and if you want something bad enough, you can get there, but you're going to have to work hard. And it feels good when you get there and you've worked hard to get it. And being able to use my experience to help kids achieve that same level of self-confidence, because it's not just about becoming a great athlete and making it to the pros and making millions of dollars. It's about developing your self-confidence, about your self-esteem, and becoming a better person so that you can be successful in all aspects of life later on.
So, coaching really shapes your leadership style. I've coached youth sports for a long time. My kids, I coached them in everything that they did. How has that changed the way that you lead?
I think it's a big part of how I try to be a leader, whether it was in the legislature or at Florida Crystals. You're trying to put a team together. You're trying to bring people together, trying to get everyone to pull in the same direction. I used to always tell my players, it was a saying, I used to use a lot of John Wooden quotes. And, it was one, I'm not sure if he actually came up with it, but I got it from his book. There's no chain stronger than its weakest link. So if you have a team or a group of people that are working towards something and you're not all working together and pulling in the same direction, you're not going to get there. That chain's going to break. It's going to fall apart. So being able to build that consensus, getting people to not necessarily like each other, because that's not always possible, but at least to work together and to have communication with each other and understand each other. I think that's a very big part of how I operate on a daily basis is how do we bring people together and pull in the same direction.
Let's talk a little about family. I know you're a proud dad. Talk to us about your family. You have kids, right? 2 boys and a daughter,
Right.
Correct?
No, 3 boys.
3 boys, excuse me.
3 boys.
3 boys. Are they following dad's footsteps or what? Tell me about them.
Yeah, they're all, I've got 3 boys and 6 grandkids. So the best part is that my 3 boys are grown up, and you never stop worrying or thinking about your kids. That's always important, but it's a lot more fun being a grandparent. You don't have to deal with a lot of the daily issues. But yeah, my kids have been, knock on wood, they've been great kids. I've been very fortunate that they've all found their way in life. My oldest and my middle son are both involved in the government process. My middle one is the associate vice president of state affairs at FIU in Miami, the university. And my oldest son worked in Tallahassee for a number of years at the Department of Health and now does a lot of contract lobbying, representing many interests around the state of Florida. And my youngest one, so they've all kind of followed my path, but in different directions. So those 2 kind of I deal with a lot because they're spending a lot of time in Tallahassee. My youngest one is the basketball coach. And I remember when he was graduating from college and he told me, I think I want to coach. I'm thinking of being a grad assistant. And he ended up being a grad assistant at Florida State. And I said to him, listen, if you want to be a basketball coach or a coach of any kind, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. You want to be a coach because you want to help kids succeed in life, that's great. If you want to be a basketball coach because you see these guys making millions of dollars on TV, that's the wrong reason, because 99% of the coaches never get there. And that's not why you should want to be a coach. Be a coach for the right reasons, and success will get you to wherever it is you're going to go. And success, you can define the success in terms of wins or losses, how much money you make, or how many kids you helped graduate. And a few years ago, he's done very well. He's now the head coach at Daytona State College and doing really well, ranked top 10 in the country. But a few years ago, they interviewed him, and it was during Hispanic Heritage Month, and he puts a quote out on his tweet, on his Twitter account, and it was something along the lines of that there is nothing that he's found more powerful than to be able to walk into a kid's living room and offer them a scholarship that will change their life and their family's life forever. And I realized at that moment that he was doing it for the right reasons. He found the reason why he was doing it, and it was to help kids. And I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, you should be, Gaston. I could tell. Gosh, that's amazing, amazing, amazing. So obviously family's super important to you, Gaston. We talked about your boys, your grandkids. You have such a demanding career. You travel a lot. You're everywhere all the time. How do you balance family and career?
I think you just have to make it a priority and understand that your priority is your family and your health, really. I mean, those 2 things have to come before your job under any circumstance. And I mean, there are moments where you're going to miss certain things as your kids are growing up. There are going to be certain events you just can't get to. But as long as your family understands that they are the priority and that you really wanted to be there, and for whatever reason you couldn't get there, I think it's important for that to have that communication. But prioritizing family is the only way to do it. Is making sure everyone understands that's your priority.
100%. So I say this all the time. Like sometimes kids teach us as much as we teach them. What lessons have you learned from your kids, and that's really impacted how you lead or approach work?
Every kid is different. Just like every person is different. So when your kids start growing up and they're becoming adults, you realize they all have different personalities. They all have different goals. They all have different ways of dealing with things. And once you understand that with your kids, that you can't treat them all the same because they're not the same. They're gonna respond differently depending on how you speak with them. And learning, I mean, that's a learning process, understanding that you carry that into the real world, or not the real, the rest of the world, and understand that you're going to deal with people that are very different, and how you speak to them is important. What you say, how you say it, and how you say things is the most important part, because you can say something that you're almost insulting someone. You say it in a very nice way, and they'll thank you, right? But having different personalities, having kids with different personalities is a learning process where you learn how to effectively communicate with them and deal with them and help them and help guide them in the right direction.
So I really appreciate it. This has been great. This has been amazing so far. I love how authentic you've been. I want to jump into Florida Crystals a little bit and learn a little bit more about the company. But before we do that, why don't we take 60 seconds for our medical minute here, and we'll be right back. So for today's Medical Minute, I'm here with Dr. Sonia Olson, a liver specialist for the TGH Digestive Health Center. We're going to talk about fatty liver disease. That sounds really bad, Doc. So tell me more about it. What is it?
Fatty liver disease is not good. And unfortunately, there is an epidemic of fatty liver disease in this country. This is a disease where the liver inappropriately stores fat. Over time, that fat causes inflammation and even scar tissue and could cause cirrhosis.
How do you know you have it, Doc?
Fatty liver disease most of the time does not cause symptoms until it's very advanced.
Should I go out and get a test right now?
Well, that's an excellent question. I don't think so, but
Okay.
You can't tell if someone has fatty liver disease by looking at them. We do know that some patients are at higher risk. So any patient with type 2 diabetes should be screened. And any patient with metabolic syndrome, so 2 or more risk factors, such as obesity, hypertension, high cholesterol, or sleep apnea, these patients should also get screened.
How do you treat fatty liver disease?
Well, diet and exercise go a long way in both preventing and treating fatty liver disease, but now there is a medication available for certain patients with fatty liver disease, making the conversation with your doctor even more important.
Awesome, Doc. Well, that's some great information. Thank you so much. And that was your Medical Minute here with Dr. Olson. Thanks so much for coming out. All right, so let's jump into Florida Crystals, right? This company has an incredible history, right? It's been around since 1960. Talk to me a little bit about some of the moments that have really defined the company.
I think one of the most important moments was back in 1985. I mean, obviously the first 25 years were important, and establishing your footprint and establishing that first mill at Osceola Mill that the whole family had built, really from scrap parts that they brought in from Louisiana in the course of those 25 years in building the business. But then in 1985, when they acquired the Okalanta refinery and the Dominican properties from Gulf and Western, I think that was a huge moment in the company's history. Obviously, it nearly doubled the land holdings in Florida. They acquired 90,000 acres, the Okalanta mill, which is our largest mill now. We have the refinery there. We have the cogen power plant there, the distribution center. So that is the one moment in 1985, which we're coming up on the 40th anniversary of that acquisition, that really took Florida Crystals in a whole different direction in terms of growth.
Let's talk about, so Florida Crystals is the only organic sugarcane grower in the United States. And obviously that's no small feat, right? It's a big deal. What challenges does that bring? And where do you see the biggest opportunities?
So, going back to your previous question, just to expand on that a little bit, because it ties into this, is after 1985, the continued growth of the company, where they started making acquisitions around the world and became a global company and vertically integrated with the refinery and Florida Crystals. These are all important pieces of the puzzle that they put together in becoming the largest, having the largest refining capacity in the world of any refiner. Whether it's continuing to grow here in Florida, you have the Yonkers refinery acquisition, you have the Domino acquisition, where we have refineries in Baltimore and Louisiana, CNH, California and Hawaii sugar refinery in California, Red Path Sugars in Canada. You have Tate and Lyle in creating a European presence, where we now have refineries in London and Lisbon and in Italy, as well as operations that we currently have in Belize and in Mexico. So that growth has allowed the company to continue to expand its operations and embed and improve its operations here in Florida and throughout the world. But the organic, we were the first to, and currently still the only growers of organic sugarcane in the United States. And that's a very difficult process. Growing organically is not easy. If you look at most farms that are organic, they're going to be small farms, a few acres, maybe 5 acres, 10 acres. We have thousands of acres, 10,000 acres of organic farms. We're the only growers of organic sugarcane in the United States. And it's a very tedious process. It's more difficult than regular farming. Even the conversion process of the land is difficult. You have typically a 3-year conversion process where you're having to grow organically, but you can't sell as organic until until the soils have been certified to be organic. But that's a multi-year process. So it is hard. It is something that the leadership in the company many years ago decided we want to go in this direction. We want to grow the sustainability efforts in the company, and that was the very beginning of it.
So let's talk about sustainability, right? That's a core part of Florida Crystal's DNA. It's what you guys are all about, right? Can you share some of the most exciting or really innovative practices that the company has implemented?
So, the organic is the basis of that sustainability, obviously. But we built a renewable energy power plant. And if you look at the sugarcane plant, it produces the most amount of biomass of any crop in the world. It is a very, very good crop for the things that we do. So we bring in the sugarcane, we extract the juice from it, we produce sugar. That's great. We have water that comes in with it. But now we have all this fiber. What do we do with it? Well, we built the power plant. We use the fiber as the fuel that produces the steam that runs our operations, that also run turn the turbines that produce electricity for our operations. Currently, we're about 80% of our operations are run with renewable energy, which is a huge deal for us. In terms of continuing down that path, we are currently the largest regenerative organic certified farm in the United States. And sometimes we get confused. What's the difference between sustainable and regenerative agriculture? Sustainable agriculture, you're basically saying, okay, I'm not going to have a negative impact on the soil. I'm not going to have a negative impact as a result of my operations. Regenerative is a whole different level of effort. Not only are you not having a negative impact, you have to have a positive impact as a result of your operations on the environment and on your soils. So and when we looked at the things that you needed to do, we realized, okay, we're already doing most of these things. We don't use any rodenticides on our properties. Why? Because years ago, we established a barn owl program. So we currently have the largest barn owl habitat and of any farm in the world. We have 2,000 owl boxes, and the owls migrate during times of the year, and they eat all our rats, which is fascinating because we were able to eliminate the use of rodenticides. That's an example of what are we doing to create a more positive impact on our soil and the environment. That's just one example. I mean, we have best management practices. We can go on for days talking about them, about the things that we do, whether it's laser leveling our fields to make sure we have no runoff from our soils and into the canals. We use the laser leveling to do that, and these are the tractors that do the laser leveling are auto guided. So they're just moving around on their own, just moving soil around.
Nobody driving it.
No, there's someone in the cabin, but they're not driving it. The
Yeah.
thing's driving itself. So that's a whole other level of innovation that we've come up with, where all of our tractors are going to be auto guided, and the operator will get to the field and they press in the number of the farm and just presses the button, and then the tractor will harvest that row. They get to the end, they turn it around, press the button again, and harvest. So what does that do? We're saving fuel. The operator isn't zigzagging through the field. We're saving cane because we're not running over cane because the thing is all run by GPS.
So Florida Crystals, does more than just sugarcane farming. Can we talk a little bit about how you guys have diversified into areas like real estate development and what led to that decision, and how's it going so far with that?
So we did, I guess about around 10 years ago, and if you look at the company and the leadership in the company, they're visionaries. They're not making decisions for the next quarter as a corporation. They're making decisions for the next generation. And it's a family business. So their decisions are long-term decisions. And they realized that they foresaw what was going to happen or what was happening in Florida with real estate. And a lot of younger people are not wanting to buy houses or can't afford to buy houses. And the multifamily rental market was going to boom. So they started building multifamily projects about 7 years ago, and currently have about 5,000 units either completed or in the pipeline in the state of Florida, most of them in Southeast Florida. We've got one project in Tampa that was one of the first ones. But it's turned out to be a great diversification of the interests of the company. And I mean, if you think about agriculture and farmers and Florida Crystals in particular and the Van Hool family, they've always been in real estate. They're landowners. They own almost 200,000 acres in Palm Beach County. Yep. So going into a different aspect of real estate was really not unheard of or something that you couldn't unimaginable. It was almost the next step. Okay, we're in real estate. What can we do to diversify our interests?
Let's talk a little bit about ASR, American Sugarcane Refinery Group. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
What is that? And what is Florida Crystal's role in that?
So years ago, the Florida Crystals owns ASR. Years ago, we decided to, when we vertically integrated, we started here at Okeelanta, and we had the Florida Crystals brand back in the early 90s. And we started taking our sugar from farm to table in our own packaging and our own label, which is now Florida Crystals, which has become really an iconic organic and natural sugar brand. A few years later, there were some opportunities to acquire some of these other sugarcane refineries around the country. And the one in Yonkers was the first one. All of these refineries are going to be on the waterfront. So again, it's real estate. These are waterfront refineries where you don't have access to agricultural land producing sugarcane, but you have access to the water where you're bringing in raw sugar on barges. So the Yonkers acquisition was the first one in New York. And then they had the Domino acquisition where they acquired the refinery in Baltimore and in Louisiana, both again on the waterfront and the harbor in Baltimore and Mississippi River in New Orleans. Same thing in California, Hawaii. It's on the waterfront, just outside of San Francisco. And they continued to acquire these refineries under the ASR banner. And then they went globally. They acquired Redpath Sugars in Canada, Belize operations, Tate & Lyle in Europe to open up the European market. And we have a refinery in London, Lisbon, and Brindisi, Italy.
So you said earlier, the Fanjul family thinks 5, 10, 15, 20 years out. So,
Absolutely.
So what's next for Florida Crystals? What should we keep an eye out for?
I'm not sure. I will have been there for 21 years in May. And the one thing I've learned is that you never know what's around the corner, because they're always thinking ahead. They're always thinking about new opportunities that they can bring to the business. So we'll see. We have no idea.
Yeah, who knows, right?
Who knows?
So Florida Crystals has a huge footprint here in Palm Beach County, right? This is home, right? And I want to talk a little bit about local impact. What is the company's approach in giving back and supporting the local community? Because I feel like you guys are everywhere.
So I think one of the things that drives a lot of our charitable giving is education, and that's kind of a foundation of our charity work. Is it's the one thing that no one can ever take from you. If you can help someone get an education, get a degree, learn a trade, be able to be marketable, no one can ever take that away from you. And maybe it's our background, having had coming from families that lost everything when they came from Cuba. But the ones that had an education, they couldn't take that away from them. And that's a big part of what we do. We have 3 organizations in the Glades, and that's a big part of our focus. We have New Hope Charities that does a lot of after-school care, summer programs for the kids in the Glades. Then we have 2 charter schools. We have the high school, the Everglades Prep, and the Glades Academy is the Ella Middle School. And again, education. How do we? And when these schools were created, there were no other charter schools in the Glades. They were the first ones. So it gave the parents an opportunity to have some choice. Not every kid is made to be educated in the same type of environment. These were smaller classrooms, smaller schools that were able to give some of the kids a little bit more personal attention and perhaps a better opportunity to succeed.
So Florida Crystals has also been a huge, big driver of job creation and economic growth, right? How do you ensure that those efforts are both impactful and sustainable? So
currently we have almost 2,000 employees here in Palm Beach County. Obviously, that's a big deal. But we also, you often hear these fights going on with unions. We actually have a very good relationship with the Machinists Union, which is all of our labor force is organized through the Machinists Union. And we work collaboratively with them on many projects. And they understand, I mean, you look at the history of the sugar industry in Florida, we've lost thousands of jobs over the last 25 years, 30 years. We've lost several mills that have been shut down. A lot of this is because of the collaborative effort, again, that we've worked with the state, the industry, the farmers in the Glades have worked with the state and the federal government to create these environmental projects. But as a result, we've lost jobs, and the county has lost the tax basis, and property has been taken off the tax rolls. But working with the union, they understand that if we lose land, they lose jobs. And that's what's created a good relationship between the industry and the union is that we have something in common. We want to protect our land. We want to make sure that we stay in business. We want to make sure that we can continue to create good paying jobs for our employees.
Let's talk about the Everglades. We've got to talk about the Everglades, right?
Absolutely.
It's such a unique and fragile ecosystem. How does Florida Crystals address environmental concerns in the region?
The Everglades, there's a long history. It's 40 years of, started with a lawsuit back in 1980s, and there's been several pieces of legislation over the years and settlements and between the state and federal government. Probably the most important piece of legislation was the Everglades Forever Act that was passed in the 1990s. The Everglades Forever Act did several things. It created a standard of cleanliness for the water going into the Everglades. That was 10 parts per billion. So the water going into the Everglades has to be I mean, that's the goal, 10 parts per billion. Just by comparison, spring water probably has 30 parts per billion of phosphorus, is what we're talking about. And that's the one nutrient that the Everglades that is most important to keep out of the Everglades, because the Everglades is a very nutrient deprived ecosystem. So any phosphorus that goes in there is going to have a negative impact. So our standard is actually cleaner than bottled water, in maybe not purified drinking water, but certainly spring water. So that was the goal. That's one of the things it did. It also created best management practices. It imposed best management practice on the farmers in the glades that are mandatory, and mandatory in the sense that there's a menu of practices, and then you have to comply with certain number of points and doing the best management practice. I mentioned one earlier, the laser leveling of the fields, so that we don't have runoff into the canals. We do soil samples. We have a young lady who has a PhD in soil science. All she does, or not all she does, but one of the things that she does is do soil tests. So she literally does thousands of soil tests on our farms every year. She takes samples, sends them to the lab sends back what the composition of that sample is. And based on that composition, she has prescriptions that she can choose from and say, okay, this is what's needed on that particular farm. This is how much in terms of fertilizer and nutrients. So we minimize the impact by understanding what's already in the soil and what can we add to the soil that will be absorbed by the plant and not wasted. One of the largest, most expensive inputs that we have is fertilizer. So we're not going to go like most people do in their backyard with a red Solo cup throwing fertilizer up in the air. I mean, this is a very specific process. It's banded. It goes in the ground as we're planting. So we're very conscientious of, number one, the impact that too much fertilizer has on the environment, but also the impact that it has on the cost of the production. So that's another example, is the soil tests that we do on an annual basis. So like that, there are many best management practices that we have implemented on our farms, which obviously makes it more expensive to farm. But we're seeing the results. The water going into the Everglades has never been cleaner. The conservation areas, most of them are pretty close to the 10 parts per billion. The impact that the best management practices and in combination with the STAs that have been built has been phenomenal. The other thing that the Everglades Forever Act did is it imposed a tax on the farmers. So every farmer in Western Palm Beach County pays an additional $25 per acre for the privilege of farming. It's literally called the agricultural privilege tax. So in addition to all other property taxes, we pay an additional tax to the Water Management District that goes towards construction of some of these environmental projects. And when I say impose, it was really, the farmers never opposed any of this. Farmers wanted to be partners in this. And in fact, we have been great partners in Everglades restoration. And anyone you talk to will tell you that, yes, the water quality problem is fixed for the most part. There's still some spots that need the additional improvements that can be made. But it's not a water quality issue anymore. It's a water quantity issue. Is how do we deliver the right amount of water at the right time to the Everglades? And that's where we're at now. And, Lake Okeechobee is kind of taking on a different life because obviously the water flows south. We don't back pump into the lake. There was back pumping at one point many years ago, but that hasn't happened in I don't know, 20, 30 years. But the water coming into the lake from the north does have high concentration of nutrients. So that's another focus of the state legislature currently is how do we deal with all of this water laden with nutrients coming into Lake Okeechobee so that we can little by little start cleaning up Lake Okeechobee. So there's a lot of projects underway in north of the lake to hold water and to treat water before it gets in the lake.
What do you think sets Florida crystals apart from others in the agricultural industry?
I don't know that we're part of. I mean, the agricultural industry is very collaborative. I mean, obviously, with the sugar industry in general, we have mechanized harvesting. That alone sets us apart from the rest of the ag industry in Florida. The mechanical harvesting that we've been doing for decades now has had a big impact on our processes. But other than that, I think agriculture is an industry that is very collaborative. We try to work if someone has some new technology that they're working on. I assure you, within 15 minutes, the rest of the Glades is going to know about it, because that's the way it is. We're all using the same people, the same suppliers. There are very little secrets out there. So I think and that's one of the beauties of this industry, is that we're all in it together. We're all dependent on Mother Nature. We're all dependent on making sure there's enough rain and making sure that there's enough sunshine, making sure that we don't have a freeze this week or next week when this Arctic blast comes down and destroys all our crops. So we're all in the same boat, and we're all rowing together. So I think generally agriculture is a very collaborative industry.
So, there are people listening to this interview that are going to be really inspired by your story. There really is. What advice would you give that Cuban kid from Miami that wants to be Gaston one day?
Just stay focused on what you're doing. Be where you're at. Be the best you can be at whatever it is you do. And, the doors open and doors close, and sooner or later you'll find the right door.
That's great advice. All right, one last question. It's kind of deep. I know we've gotten already kind of deep, but I ask this to everyone. You've accomplished a lot of really cool stuff. You've done a lot of cool things, everything from coaching to serving the people in the state of Florida. And now you're leading a company with tons of employees, or you're part of leadership in one of the biggest companies in the world. What do you want your legacy to be?
I'm not sure that I have have a need for a legacy, but I think, in daily life, the ability to work with other people, I think, is important. And whatever it is that you're doing, if you're constantly fighting with the people that you're working with, you're not going to make progress. I think, and maybe that's my personality. I like to work collaboratively and in terms of a legacy, but who I am is I'm a team builder. I like to bring people together and work together towards something. I think that's just who I am.
Well, this has been great. Anything we've missed? Anything that we need to tell the world about Florida Crystals?
Look out for the shelves in your supermarket. You're going to see a new rice product coming out. It's regenerative organic certified rice from Florida Crystals.
Awesome. Awesome. There you go. You heard it here on the Palm Beach North podcast.
Stay tuned.
Well, Gaston, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate everything you do for our community, our chamber, our state as a whole. You guys are great partners, and we really appreciate it. Thank you for being so authentic and real today. This was a great conversation. I learned a lot.
Well, thank you for everything you and the chamber do for the businesses in Palm Beach County. If it weren't for you, you're one of those pieces that provides a mouthpiece for all of business. So we thank you.
You got it, Coach. Thanks for everything. And for everyone tuning in, thank you so much again. This has been great. Tell all your friends about what's going on in Palm Beach North. Like, share, follow. Today's been great. We'll see you guys in a couple weeks. Thanks so much.